1957, my family moved to an old farmhouse in Mount Laurel, New Jersey. I was 7 years old at the time, and as I went upstairs to my new bedroom with an armload of things, a terrible wave of fear swept over me when I reached the top of the stairs. From then on, I disliked that small area at the top of the stairs where it met the hallway. Unhappily, there was no way to avoid it. I had to walk through it to get into my bedroom. Other than that, nothing else happened that I know of until 1966. From my bed, I could see it out into the hallway to that small area on top of the stairs that had always frightened me. One night, towards the end of August, I woke up very, very slowly, only to realize that there was a terrible stench in the bedroom. It was like a mix of rotten garlic, human waste, and rotting flesh. Then I noticed the room was icy cold. Remember, it was August, usually the hottest time of the year in New Jersey. I was lying on my side, facing the doorway, and when I opened my eyes, I saw that the bedroom door was wide open, and a figure stood in the doorway, very close to the spot that had always spooked me. Since no lights were on, all I could make out was the silhouette of a tall, dark figure that seemed to be wearing some kind of long robe with a hood. What truly petrified me was seeing this creature's eyes. They glowed red and stared straight at me. But before I could scream, somehow the knowledge came to me from somewhere, my guardian angel, that if I acknowledged this creature's existence, I would be haunted for the rest of my life. So I pretended to be asleep, which was not easy, and after a while, I felt the cold room become warm again, the dreadful smell disappear, and the figure fade away. We moved out in 1967, and the house was torn down in 1972. I, for one, was not the least bit sorry to see it go. As a child living in our old cotton mill house, raised by my grandmother, great aunt, and her daughter, my cousin, I had many frightening paranormal experiences. I will elaborate on some of them as time goes on, but this story is a recap of many of the things I've experienced living in that house as a young child. I heard the classic footsteps, sounds of papers being crumbled, sounds of books falling when nothing was out of place. Everybody in the family, including myself, heard our names called. Once, I woke up and heard a soft, echoey female voice say deep magic. By way of explanation, deep magic was a facial moisturizer. I once woke up to see a tiny pinpoint of light in my room, which expanded until the entire room was bright as day, and then faded quickly back to darkness. Once I crawled under my grandmother's bed while everybody was outside, something I was not allowed to do, and heard a gruff voice beside my ear say one word, gray. I had then, and still have no idea what that could have meant, but I got the heck out of there from under that bed, and never went back under there again. I had an encounter, a long conversation in the house with a strange unknown elderly woman who called herself Granny Grunt. I saw a little black imp, the shadow of a skeleton, and a handless arm which came up from between the bars of my iron bedspread, and saw blood drip from the ceiling. When I was about 4, I saw a shadowy figure that at the time I thought was the Easter Bunny walk through the living room and disappear into the wall. I now suspect there might have been some sort of gateway in my cousin's room, because much of the activity seems to come from or disappear in that direction. One night, I'd gone to bed early and had a dream that a being, who looked what UFOologists nowadays call an alien gray, was trying to force a full-sized apple down my throat. I awoke, gasping for breath, crying and choking, with that feeling still lingering in my throat of something big being forced down it. My grandmother had an old rocking chair with a woven cane bottom, which creaked loudly whenever you would sit down in it or get up. When my great aunt broke her hip and later died of cancer, for 2 nights in a row, I heard something sit down in that chair, squirm around a little bit, and then get up. I once heard the sound of the chair rocking in the night. Additionally, while my great aunt was in the hospital dying of cancer, I was awakened 3 nights in a row by something banging on the front door. Of course, nobody was there, but my great aunt died 3 days later. Later on, when I was in my 20s, still living in that house, I awoke to see a short woman with her hair in a bun and a white apron over an old-fashioned dress standing by my bed, who quickly vanished. I had many experiences of being in that half-awake and unable to move state, while hearing voices talking and people moving around in the house. Once, while I was in that state, I felt and heard something leap quickly into the bed beside me and lie there, growling menacingly. It vanished, of course, when I was able to fully wake up. I finally got married when I was 28 and moved away. After my cousin passed away, I inherited the house and my husband and I moved back into it. Strangely enough, I never heard or saw anything in those days we lived there together. The house was totally quiet and peaceful. My wife and I lived in Ringgold, Georgia, and have lived there for 25 years in the log home that we built ourselves, with a lot of help from friends and family. This was about 1983. About 3 or 4 years after we moved into our log home, some strange things began to happen. We would be watching TV when all of a sudden the TV would go off, and when we found the problem, it was unplugged from the back of the TV. You have to turn the plug on the power cord to unplug the TV, and it was lying on the floor behind the TV. After this happened, we started to hear Indian music and some very low volume chanting in the bedroom when my wife and I would be sleeping. I would see the outline of a body on the wall, like a shadow moving, and it looked as if it was a stereotypical Native American. There was a moment where I went into the bathroom. In the mirror, I saw the presence of some dark face behind me. At times it would get very chilly in the house, even when it was warm outside, but only in one bedroom. We have a big wall clock hanging on the great room wall, and has 3 chimes hanging down from it for the doorbells. When you push the doorbell button, the chime plays a short tune. At times, for no reason at all, the chimes would start to move and ring like someone had pushed the doorbell button, but there would be no one there. Our commodes would flush, and there would not be anyone out there to flush them. We have found human bones in Indian pottery, arrowheads, and lead bullets. We do know that a Civil War battle was fought on our land, and we checked with a university in Alabama. They told us that this was an area that had a Cherokee Indian village back in the 1700s to 1800s. We reburied the bones in the pottery shards, and the strange happenings have not been as frequent as they were. We still live here and intend to stay, and the strange happenings have not been a threat or harmed anyone in any way. This is an account of events experienced by a close friend of mine. I've changed the names to protect the identities of the people involved. These events took place in Manchester, England. I met Charlotte some 2.5 years ago when we both signed up for a course of ice skating lessons. We got on well from the start and stayed in touch afterwards. Charlotte's father had started to suffer from dementia, and her mother was taking care of him at home. Unfortunately, her mother suffered a stroke in November 2008 and was unable to return home. Therefore, it fell on Charlotte to look after her father. Sadly, Charlotte's father died in his sleep in February 2010. This was a big shock as, although 89 years of age, he was very sprightly and in good health. As you can imagine, Charlotte was devastated. One of Charlotte's sisters came up from down south to stay with her in the days afterwards, and while they were arranging the funeral, they both slept in their father's bed. A couple of days after he died, Charlotte had a very vivid dream. In it, she saw her father as a young man in rolled up shirt sleeves and a tank top. He was running down a hill and hot on his heels was a dog, like they were having a race. She said her father looked very happy and full of life. She has never experienced anything like this before and felt it was her father's way of showing her where he was now. I asked her if she recognized the dog. She said her father used to talk about a dog he had when he was young, but she had never seen a picture of it. It was obviously a very profound experience because it eased her grief, in that she'd felt he had gone to a better place. It is now March 2010. I saw Charlotte over the weekend, and she told me what else had been happening. Charlotte, her sister, and her brother-in-law had been in their father's house clearing it out and decorating. Charlotte was in one of the bedrooms and came across an organ her father bought her when she was 16. She plays the piano. Anyway, she sat down and started playing it. The moment she did this, the phone started ringing. Bear in mind, the phone was disconnected some weeks ago. Her sister answered it, but there was no one there. While the three of them were upstairs in separate areas, Charlotte's brother-in-law asked who was making a drink. Her sister replied that they were all busy and that he should make his own drink. Her brother-in-law said that was not what he meant and asked who was boiling the kettle. When Charlotte's sister went downstairs, the kettle had just boiled and switched itself off. No one had put it onto a boil. A day or so later, Charlotte began playing the organ, and once again, as soon as she did, the phone rang, just like before, still disconnected of course. Charlotte said that one night they were sat around talking about their father, and the lights in the room started flickering. This has never happened before. As soon as they stopped talking, the flickering stopped. I told Charlotte that experiences like this are fairly common, and it's her father letting her know that he is still around. The last time I saw her, she was in pieces. After these experiences, although still very upset, she seems very much calmer and accepting. It is wonderful when things like this happen. If only it could be that way for everyone. Hello. I wrote to you a while ago about the house I grew up in, but I had something happen to me back in 2005 that I could never explain. My husband and I were going through the immigration process back in 2005, and while our case was being reviewed by the INS, my husband had to stay in Mexico. This was a very stressful time, and we were facing a lot of uncertainties. So we packed up and moved to his family's house down in Samoa, Mishashoan. At the time, my oldest son was only 2 years old, and my mom had driven down with us to help with the INS appointments and to help us get settled into our new home. Well, so when we finally arrived to my husband's family home, we got unpacked and settled in to await our verdict. We would hear from the INS 6 months later. The house is basically 2 homes together. The building is L-shaped. It has the original house, and then you have to go outside into the courtyard to access the second house. This area had a bathroom and a store, and a supply room for the store, and above this was our apartment. This area had not anyone stay in it for maybe 10 years. This area was like a duplex attached by a door through the living rooms. so we took the left side and closed up the right side. Now, the side we took had an unusual feature. It had a huge bedroom that was divided by a wall and had an open doorway, so it was 2 bedrooms in one. We slept in one bedroom, and my mom slept on the other side. Now, this is a huge home, especially by Mexico standards, but we only shared it with 2 other people, my brother and sister-in-law, because the other family members moved about 10 years before. Nothing about this home seemed scary or creepy, but I did learn that between the 2 houses, 2 of my husband's toddler sisters were buried. I didn't know this until months later, so a few days after we arrived, we were cleaning and unpacking. My husband was down in the store covering for his brother, and my mom and I were upstairs cleaning the bedroom. She got tired and decided to go out on the balcony and sit. She took my son with her so I could continue cleaning. Well, I decided to sit down on the bed, and I was faced towards the window looking out. Well, I could see the door leading to the living room out of the corner of my eye. It was halfway open. While I was sitting there, the door opened up, and someone walked into the little bedroom. I heard the door move across the carpet, and I saw out of the corner of my eye someone in a white shirt. I figured it was my mom and thought nothing of it, but then wondered where my son was, and I started to worry why she had left him on the balcony alone. So I called out, and no one answered. I got up and walked across the room and into the little bedroom. I was certain someone would be there, because I had seen someone go in there. Well, I was completely surprised when I walked in there, and no one was in the room. This really startled me. So I walked out into the balcony, and there was my mom and son. I asked if she had went into the room, and Mom just looked at me and said no. And no one but us and my husband were there that day. Another time, I was walking up our stairs to our apartment, and I had a vision flash in front of my face that completely terrified me. I still don't know what it was or why it happened, but it was at night, and I looked to my right at the wall, and there was this horrible face like a gargoyle, just for a second, and then it was gone. The only place I felt really uncomfortable at was the downstairs storage area. I would run past the place. It had a weird feeling to it. Nothing ever happened around there other than that feeling. The other times involved my son. During this time, he developed an imaginary friend. He would call it the baby, or baby sometimes. He would be in the hallway of the kitchen playing and say, "Oh, come see the babies." Or he would be talking, and I asked him who he was talking to, and he would say the babies. I didn't think anything of it until my husband told me about his sisters. Then I felt some kind of uncomfortable with it. One day, we were sitting in the living room, and he comes in crying and tells me that the babies are hiding under the bed. Well, I didn't want to look under the bed, but I did anyways, and of course, there wasn't anything there, but it still made the hair on the back of my neck rise up. The only other thing was one day, my husband and I were sitting on the couch and my son was playing on the rug, and we were just talking, and my son looks over into the corner and says, "Look at that man with the cowboy hat on." Well, we didn't see anything, so we just said, "Oh, is there?" And he continues playing with his truck, and we keep talking. Well, about 10 minutes later, my son looks up and says, "Oh, he's gone." I don't know. We had left 6 months later, and were able to come back to the US, and have just experienced all these stories that have occurred. It was weird, to say the least. Later, I was talking to my sister-in-law, a different one, who had grown up there, and I told her about her experiences, and she got really defensive and didn't want to talk about it anymore. So who knows? Thanks for letting me share. I had recently moved from our old apartment. We were visited there by an unknown presence. A couple of years ago, I'd won some haunted dolls I had bidded on. One was a doll owned by a murdered teenager. The obituary article about her murder was included with the doll. This is the one that I think may have brought on much of the phenomena. My sister heard knocking on my bedroom door from the inside. We live in the same apartment. I didn't tell her that I had the haunted dolls until she told me that. Gave more credibility to it that way. I tried to debunk it by saying that I may have knocked on the door while I slept, but she said no. She heard me up, getting ready for work, getting my clothes on out of the drawers. I didn't hear it from the inside though. It happened one more time the next morning, but she asked the spirit to leave, and then it stopped. But other things started to happen. Our music box mysteriously came to life with a full wind. Even though it was wound all the way down, it wasn't played for over a year. Then again 2 hours later, again at full music without being wound. Kept playing for several minutes. Also, our kitchen faucet moved from the right to the left overnight. It is hard to move it by hand. If that weren't enough, we had to unplug out of the power strip, and neither her or I unplugged it. It isn't easy to unplug. It was kept plugged in for the pump for the inflatable bed, which had a leak in it and had to be pumped up every couple of hours, so we never unplugged it. Our visitor made sure to make itself known. I remember one night I had so much trouble sleeping. I'm an insomniac, so I often wake up many times during the night. I went to fetch myself a snack, so I got up. The living room leads to the kitchen, so I have to walk through there to get to the kitchen. As I'm walking through the living room, I hear a monstrous laugh erupt, a deep voice saying "ha." It creeped me out for a second. Then I brushed it off and proceeded to the kitchen. I'm now sitting down at the kitchen table and can see the living room from where I'm sitting. The only light I had on was the kitchen, but it was dim enough that I was able to see a dark shadow move from one end of the room to the other. It wasn't my sister because she was knocked out from rest, so I'm going back to my bedroom. As I'm heading past the living room, there was a window, and the curtains were moving by themselves. There was no wind or open windows, and no AC unit on. Nothing that could have made the window curtains do this. A second after this, I feel a pain on my arm, and female laughter, once again this time. I check to see if my sister is up, but she is still asleep. I dismiss it, and say it's just me and my imagination. So finally get tired enough to sleep when I'm laying down and staring at the ceiling. That's when I see it. A face that looks like a witch, much like the witch from The Wizard of Oz. It appears only for a few seconds, but it really made me paranoid. For some reason, I was able to sleep. How I did so, I can't even say, but I did. When I awoke in the morning, I looked back at my arm, and there was a red imprint of a hand there, as if someone tried to twist my arm. I know it sounds crazy, but I wasn't too afraid, even after all that. I investigate places now and then for people, and I'm very much used to activity. My meter readings some nights were very high in some areas that are usually in the green area on the meter. Many times, I would ask for a sign that it was there, and then it would spike into the red zone. I sort of missed that activity after moving out, but perhaps someday it will return in the new place I moved into. I wanted to share a story with you about something that happened to somebody I knew when I was a young man in Minnesota that always sends chills down my spine. When I was about 12 years old, which would have been 1977, my brother Royce was working in a town named Worthington, Minnesota, about 30 miles from my hometown of Jackson, Minnesota. He worked at a lumber yard called UBC and had a friend that worked at a local grain elevator. The silos for grain elevators in that part of the country rise hundreds of feet into the air and have the capacity to store tons and tons of grain, whether that be corn or soybeans, whatever the silo is being used for at that time. Occasionally, the employees of the elevator climb a ladder on the outside of the silos and get into the silo via an access door at the very top in order to inspect the grain inside, making sure it's not too wet, rotting, or whatever. Inside the access door, there is a catwalk that circles around the entire circumference of the silo. My brother's friend climbed the outside ladder, opened the access door, and lowered himself onto the catwalk that circled the inside of the silo. After walking halfway around the silo on the catwalk, my brother's friend, I don't even recall his name any longer, observed what he thought was an excessive amount of moisture on the surface of the corn, which was what the silo was being used for at the time. So, being an industrious young man, he jumped over the catwalk rail and walked out onto the surface of the corn to roughly the middle of the silo to take a closer look. After inspecting the corn, he decided to just continue his journey across the surface of the corn to get back to the catwalk on the other side of the silo. As the catwalk was a few feet higher than the level of the corn, he had to grab onto the catwalk rail and bounce to get his foot up to the catwalk platform and swing his leg over the rail. As he swung his foot over the rail, he heard a noise behind him. Balancing with one leg over the catwalk rail and one leg on the catwalk platform on the outside of the rail, he turned around to see what the noise was. Much to his horror, the corn that he had just walked across was falling straight down, hundreds of feet to the bottom of the silo, which was cement floor. It landed with a crash a few seconds later. Instead of walking on solid surface of corn, as he had assumed, he had actually walked across a crust of rotten corn that had formed on top of the silo when corn had previously stored in the silo. The remaining corn had been removed from the silo the previous week. He spent a few months sitting on the catwalk, staring down into the depths of the silo, and then silently got up, went out across the access door, made his way back down the ladder on the outside of the silo, and took the rest of the day off. Oh, and the creepiest part yet, when he was heading back to where he was going, he actually saw in the distance a farmer of some sort, but it definitely looked like an apparition. As he was getting closer and closer to the man, who was standing there, almost as if he was lifelessly stoned out of his mind, he disappeared. His face looked so rugged, disfigured, and it looked like he was emanating pure evil. He later awoke in the evening in his own bed, to a man choking him out in his sleep. He woke up immediately, and the man was gone. The man, the same guy who he saw, the farmer in the fields. He was described as having the most bulgy red eyes he had ever seen in his life, in the face of evil. Something was going on there, and he couldn't quite place his finger on it, but it was definitely demonic of some sort. That farmer was very protective of the cornfields it seemed that he may have raised himself, although I'm not sure why he even appeared in the first place, in the field, or as a possible sleep paralysis or ghostly encounter at night. Nevertheless, it gave me nightmares for a long time. I've known about this Ghost Stories website for a long time, probably since the late 90s. I don't visit the site too often, probably 3 or 4 times a year, but when I visit it, I enjoy it. Anyway, I wanted to share a couple of stories that kind of dawned on me while reading the site today. While I was reading your site, I remembered some of the experience I had at Paris Island, specifically in the rifle range area. Well, when I searched on the internet for Paris Island haunting, I came across this story. This same event in regards to fire which happened to a friend of mine. He was so spooked that he woke me up early for fire watch duty because he couldn't take it. He saw a figure in the mirror in the bathroom. The difference between his story and the story from the link is that he saw the figure in the mirror, but to him, it looked as if he was in the bathroom. The bathrooms were in the large area we call the squad bay. The drill instructor's office was typically there. My friend had me go in the bathroom, but I didn't see anything. I took over his shift and worked mine. I recall hearing sounds like someone was moving in the bathroom. I checked a few times, but I didn't see anything. If I'm being honest, I was hoping that I would, which is why I didn't mind taking a double shift. My second story is an interesting one, because it was an experience we all witnessed. Again, this was in the same barracks where we stayed for the rifle range. We had all entered the barracks after lunch, and we were all standing in front of our foot lockers as our drill instructor, Sergeant Minix, was yelling at us over something. He was standing right at the door that we always used to enter and exit the barracks. We're on the second floor of the 3-floor unit. Well, while he was yelling, there were 3 distinct knocks on the door. It was the 3 knocks that all recruits had to do in order to approach the drill instructor at his office, or when a recruit has to enter another squad bay. By knocks, they were not traditional knocks on the door, but more like hand slaps against the door. As soon as the 3rd knock was heard, he flung the door open. Now, if someone was standing there, they would have had a door to the face. There was no one there, and there was absolutely no possibility that someone could have jumped out of the way or hid. They would have had to run up or down the stairs or jump over the railing and taken a very high and nasty fall, and would have been obvious just hearing footsteps. Looked up and down the stairs and said, "Must have been a ghost." It was the time of day where all platoons would have returned to their barracks, so it wasn't some recruit falling behind or a drill instructor late. That just doesn't happen. Paris Island is very orderly in everything. Of all the ghost stories I've heard, I've never read or heard one where a room full of people experienced the same thing.
I read many of the stories on your site and decided to tell one of my own. This is the scariest and most unexplainable thing that has ever happened to me. First, I'll give a little background information. I grew up on a farm in rural South Georgia and spent a great deal of my free time fishing, hunting, and exploring, and always doing this by myself, since there weren't a lot of other kids around and I only had a younger sister. I never really experienced any fear of anything, other than being late for dinner, all the years I was growing up, and I can't recall any paranormal experiences other than the one I'm about to share with you. I had a best friend from school that I started hanging out with after we became old enough to drive and got our trucks, which are required for country boys. For the next 2 years, we did most of our hunting and fishing and troublemaking together. After we graduated from high school, we even went to the same local college and continued to hang out. My granddaddy owned a farm in the same county that we lived in, and I would go deer hunting on his land sometimes, but I had never taken my friend there with me. Behind my grandparents' house were several barns, then several large fields, then a large pond with a swampy area, then a large pasture that stretched from one side of their property to the other, property line to property line. This wooded area was immediately behind the pasture and also encompassed the entire backside of the property. The woods were also enclosed on the back and on each side with a 4-foot tall fence, since cows roll out into the pasture and wooded area at times. You will soon see why all this detail is important. On the 3 sides of the wooded area were large open fields belonging to the neighbors, with each field belonging to a different neighbor. Take note that there are no more trees or woods close by. During the fall of our first year in college, I had scouted these woods and put up 2 deer stands, one on each side of the property on the property lines, but also very close to active deer trails and signs. These stands were no more than 100 yards apart, and about 150 yards into the woods from the pasture. I decided one weekend to treat my friend to a little hunting paradise, although I had yet to see anything other than squirrels all season long. We went to the woods about 4 p.m., with it being dark by 6. I took him to his stand and then proceeded across the woods to mine. Just after the sun went down, I heard my friend whistle loudly, obviously trying to get my attention. I whistled back. He whistled again as though he didn't hear me. Again, I whistled back, even louder this time. There was no response. About 5 minutes passed, and then I heard him whistle again. But he was closer to me than he should have been, but still through the woods somewhere. I found this very strange, since we were supposed to sit in our stands until after dark, and then meet up in the pasture to walk back out to the house. He whistled again and was even closer, and I could tell that he was almost running, and he started calling out my name. He sounded panicked and was coming straight toward me, although there is no way he could know where the deer stand was, since he had never been there before, and I didn't respond to him until he called my name. I climbed down from the tree stand as he approached, and when I got on the ground, he ran up and said, "We gotta get out of here. Something big is after me." Instead of joining him in the rush, I stood there looking and listening. Sure enough, in a few seconds, it sounded like a bulldozer was coming through the woods, but without the engine. I could hear trees breaking and large bushes being shaken and trampled, and it was coming right at me with the sound becoming deafening, as though it were right on top of us. I started running down the fence headed for the pasture, and realized that my friend had run ahead of me and stopped. When he saw me running, he took off running again. We ran as fast as we could through the woods with the sound of massive destruction right on our heels. As we broke out into the pasture and got about 50 feet from the edge of the woods, the sound stopped. We continued to run until we were halfway across the pasture and turned to look at each other as we ran, both realizing that either we were no longer being chased or there was just nothing to be torn and crushed in the pasture. We both stopped and turned around, dropping to the ground and shouldering our rifles, aiming to kill whatever was behind us. To our amazement, there was nothing there. The daylight was almost gone, causing the woods to appear as nothing more than a black blob. I told my friend to get up and run for the pond while I guarded the rear. Then he would stop and guard the rear while I ran to him. After meeting up again at the pond, we both walked in silence back to my grandparents' house. We got into our separate trucks and drove to our parents' houses, not mentioning the event until many years later. We still remain close friends then and even today, but we still don't know what happened in the woods that night. I did return to those woods a week later by myself, but in the middle of the day. I walked over the entire wooded area and never even saw one broken branch or bush. I walked in the fields around the wooded area and saw no large or unusual footprints. My friend never returned to those woods with me, even though I returned many times day and night, and never again experienced any strange occurrences or sounds. I know there was nothing physical in the woods that night, but whatever it was, I obviously didn't want my friend there, and he got the point loud and clear.
Hey Phantoms, so first of all, thank you so much for being patient. I just wanted to say thank you again for always tuning in, and guys, please take a moment to actually like the video, share it across all social media, and really just leave a comment or two if you're listening to this video right now in the outro and everything. It really helps, especially during this time when things are chaotic. Views might be a little bit down in general because of everything, which is ironic because you would think views would be high, but no, it's not. Views are actually up my butthole and around the corner. Oh gosh, I'm gonna get demonetized because I made some innuendo and what the heck am I talking about? Guys, I'm just happy to get a video out for you guys. Anyway, Love you so much. I don't want to keep this any more longer than it needs to be. Please go in the comments section and let me know which story you love the most. There are a lot of terrific stories in this. And thank you to GoodniteGoosebumps, who's been so kind to actually help me out with this video. I don't know why I said these. Am I Italian or something? These guys. I don't know. I love Italian people because they're just so good at making food and being so hospitable. I don't know what I'm talking about. Guys, I love you so much, and I'll see you in the next video. I mean no offense to anything. I'm just not making any sense as usual, and I love you all. So, bye-bye. Love you, and I'll see you in the next video.